Before we get into this week's episode, I have to let you know that, yet again, I faced some technical difficulties with the audio. Those technical difficulties were due to human error, and that human was me. So the audio is nowhere near as good as I would like it to be, but due to the subject of this episode, you will understand why I went ahead with the original recording. And the leaf blowers are out. Welcome back to that Grief Relief podcast. I'm Katie, and today I'm joined by Ewan Walton. We just had a very long conversation about the fact that he is British, but doesn't sound British, in my opinion. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Good.
Apart from the fact that it seems I sound like a complete suffer.
Yeah, you do. You sound South African. So Ewan and I have had a cup of tea, cup of coffee, as always is the case, because we've never met before. And then we just got chatting, and I do a sound check, and I always say, tell me your full name, your date of birth, and where you were born. And Ewan comes out with Cheshire, you said, didn't you?
Basically, yeah, Cheshire.
And what? I thought you were South African.
Yeah.
But you've got no roots to South Africa. Never lived there.
No, and I get Aussie a lot as well. Like, even my best friends from back home, they think I sound Australian, so nobody seems to think I sound English except for my mum.
It's really weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, you'll suss that out when you listen to the podcast anyway a little bit later.
Will they?
Yeah, exactly. Or will they? They'll probably just go, Katie, he sounds like he's from Cheshire.
Yeah, he sounds very normally English. I don't know what you're talking about, hopefully.
I know you know. Okay, enough of that. Right. Ewan and I were introduced through a mutual friend on email because of, obviously, the podcast. That doesn't make any sense, but you know what I mean. We were introduced through a mutual friend because you have recently suffered a huge loss. And when I say recently, Sarah passed away 6 weeks ago?
January 9th, so...
January 9th, and what are we now? February the 16th.
Yeah.
My goodness. I don't know anything about the story. I don't know anything about Sarah, and Sarah's your cousin. So tell me everything and sort of why you sort of wanted to come on here to use it as a platform, really, because I know there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we talked about it the other day, there was something that you said, which is, you know, talking through things, which I'm a big advocate about anyway. If you can make the difference for even one person, then that's a great thing, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's, I'm an advocate in speaking openly about the way that I feel since maybe around about 5 or 6 years. With regards to Sarah, if she talked about things more, and then maybe she would still be with us. Mm-hmm. Sarah and I are cousins. We would see each other fairly often, but we weren't in like each other's friends network.
Okay.
When we would meet, it would be like with my kids,
right.
For example, when she was great with my kids. Sometimes we'd meet for dinner, etc. Every now and again, I would introduce Sarah to like the ex-girlfriend as the token family member, etc.
Right.
And
that's both in Dubai. This is in Dubai, okay.
Yeah. So, you know, Sarah came out to the Middle East in about 15 years ago. I came out about 20 years ago. She was married when she came out, and she got divorced about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, it took everybody by surprise. The verdict from the police is that she took her own life. Mm-hmm. That's how it seems to be, although there's still some elements of doubt in the fact that, you know, there's no note left. You know, I had to look through her messages and her phone to try and see if there was anything there that would give any kind of feedback as to why she took this decision. Mm-hmm. All of her messages were normal. A couple of friends where she was talking about not being happy about certain things in her life, but nothing to indicate to those friends that the demons inside herself, which she would sometimes talk about in the running months with her live-in maid, were just becoming too too strong for her to be able to take. So one morning she woke up, she hadn't been drinking any alcohol, she hadn't been taking any drugs, and she just decided that she'd had enough. So reading through all of that, for me, was kind of, big learning lesson when it comes to understanding women's mental health, because for a variety of reasons, supporting mental health for men since a number of years. Suicide is the biggest killer of men in the UK, which is shocking when you think about it like that. It's also still growing. It's the fastest growing killer of men between 35 and 50. But then, it kills 3 times as many men as it does women. But that's still a lot of women.
Still a lot of women.
Yeah. So what are the reasons why? So in looking through, trying to get some semblance of things with Sarah, there were things that she was very unhappy. She was very successful in her life. She was very active. She played rugby. She would go scuba diving. She would get involved in activities that supported children, things like Heroes for Hope. She would try new things like cycling, and she would throw herself fully at it. But inside, it seemed that relatively recent things, it just manifested in herself that she was single, she didn't have children, she wasn't happy with the way that she looked.
How old was she?
42.
Okay.
These are pressures that men don't feel in the same way when you talk about those things, and as women. I do think that there is more societal pressures on women when it comes to things like marriage, children, etc.
Yeah.
When it comes to things like beauty, I mean, even women themselves, they will turn around to men and say, "Oh, it doesn't matter about you. You're a guy. You don't have to worry about how you look." Why?
Yeah.
Whereas women, that's something that's, I think, a combination of nature and nurture. And she woke up in the morning on what we think was a Thursday morning, and she decided to take her own life, and she was found on a Saturday.
Oh my goodness.
So, she would have known who was going to find her.
Yeah.
She clearly was not in the right place. But she gave that one last thought of like, okay, I know who's going to find me. I don't want them to see me in the way that they're going to find me. So she decided to put a shawl covering her face, which just there's a certain level of thinking that you go through. One is, I've had enough. The other is, I care about the person who's going to see me, and I don't want that to happen. So the main things was, so we're now her father, who's an incredibly strong guy to take into account, who I'd like to talk about for a moment.
Please.
He went from finding out his daughter had taken his own life, her own life, to his wife dying 3 days later, to then having to fly out to Dubai, take on the processes here. And I've got to be fair, the Dubai police, the government here and everything, things were a lot easier than I thought they would be. I thought that there would be a lot of red tape. I thought that when we went to the police station, things would be harder than they were.
Okay.
It doesn't quite work as it does back home in the UK. Yeah.
Sure.
But once you get used to that, then it's fine. Of course, we work with this fantastic agency.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that a bit later about the whole, because certainly as well, a lot of my audience are based here and in the Middle East, but a lot of my audience aren't, and they would then assume, an Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern country, how would it be dealt with, certainly from a religious and cultural point of view, because of how she died. I'd be very interested to touch on that a bit later, but You were talking about Ian, her dad.
Yeah. So most people know my uncle Ian as Patrick, just in case there's confusion. His name is actually Patrick Ian Carmody.
Okay.
But in the family we've always called him Ian.
It's a very common thing.
My dad would always call him Ian.
Yeah.
So he went through that, then got on a plane, and before he got on a plane, because I was talking to him, and on the phone before he came out, and he was very clear with me, like, listen, I needed things to be very businesslike. Okay. I need you to help me organize these things so that, you know, we don't start talking about how sorry everybody feels for me and everything. I just need to do what needs to be done and then come back, which of course I can understand.
I mean, and assuming, sorry, you said his wife died as well. Was that expected? Was it unexpected? Not to take away from Sarah's story, but...
Yeah, no, actually that was probably most likely another factor in it, is the fact that her mother had been suffering from dementia for around 4 years. And then over Christmas time, she went into hospital and the doctor said she doesn't have long left to live. Now Sarah was planning to go back to the UK for Christmas and New Year to be with her mother and father, and because of COVID, she was advised ultimately by the UK government that, you know, shouldn't travel, there's this risk, etc. And I've never been a fan. I respect everybody's opinion about COVID, etc. But it's not trying to quarantine and isolate people who need medical care or need family and friends support, or who need a job, who need an income, who need people to come to work in order to keep their businesses going, is not helping the longer term effects. And as far as Sarah's father is concerned, she's a COVID casualty. He will say that directly.
Okay.
Yeah, so for him, he originally wanted to start something that created some awareness or pressure in the UK about the fact that, look, quarantine and isolation isn't necessarily working, we need to try different methods. Because if she'd gone home for Christmas, she would still be with us. He's convinced of
I was going to say, he knows that, he's convinced of that.
He's convinced about that. So from that perspective, he's going through all of those emotions. He's feeling like maybe he should have pushed his daughter to come back to the UK. You know, he's dealing with all of those kinds of guilt. And if you've got hindsight, you should feel guilty. But if you don't have hindsight, nobody should feel guilty. You just don't know what's going to be happening. So he came out. He stayed with me. He didn't like silence.
Okay.
Because he said that as soon as things were silent, then he would start thinking, and he just was very much a man. Tried to detach from my emotions, try and think that things aren't happening, and get on with things, you know, very British, let's just get things done. Because he knew that he needed to grieve. He didn't want to, because of course that would mean facing acceptance, but he also wasn't able to because he felt he could fall apart. And you know, who wouldn't in such a situation? Nobody, you know, being a father myself, that's awful. And
losing your daughter and your wife in 3 days.
Yeah. So, you know, we talked all the time about all kinds of stuff, just to talk, for the sake of talking.
Yeah.
And
did you ever, sorry to interrupt, did you ever try and advise him or guide him otherwise and say to him, you know, you are allowed to agree? Did you ever see any emotion, any crack, any thing from him where you thought, okay, well, we need to keep an eye out?
No, I did. I mean, for sure he had his moments, a couple of times in a meeting with one of the lawyers, and another time in a meeting with the celebrant who was arranging the service. So I kind of stepped in to try to change course of the conversation. So maybe right, wrong, I don't know, but I was trying to look after him. When it was just us on our own, there was a couple of moments where I could feel him going into that, and he was getting emotional. But we kind of just kept the conversation going. We had a deep conversation about nature versus nurture when it comes to mental health and mental illness. And of course he's searching for answers, he's trying to find clues and answers, and nobody really knows.
No.
At one point does, ill health turn into illness when it comes to your mental state. And most people experience feeling a certain level of being depressed. But I think that there's a spectrum from a nature perspective. I'm not saying this is the case with Sarah, I'm just talking in general pictures. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or anything. But people talk about mental health and it's just, this is what happens when you get depressed. But there is, I believe, a certain spectrum. A little bit like autism. That there's a combination of nature and nurture. That people are born with on a certain spectrum where their mental health can be fragile, more susceptible to the nurture that they have in childhood and what happens to them in later life that could then put them over a cliff, so to speak. But some people have very good mental health, so they don't necessarily, they're able to handle with very tough situations. So there was an interesting documentary on Netflix recently actually about triplets.
Yes,
Yeah,
identical strangers, 3 identical strangers. Yeah.
You saw it?
Yeah.
So I mean, my take on it personally is that it's a nature and nurture thing. So all 3 were born with a weakness when it comes to mental health and mental illness. But one of them was brought up in a way that made him much more susceptible to going off a cliff. That was my personal take. But anyway, we won't start talking Netflix.
No, but it is interesting because, as you say, there's all something there. But they were, so basically these triplets were then adopted into 3 different families, and that's what Ewan is getting at. Is because then they were all brought up very, very differently. And spoiler alert, but one of them commits suicide. And that's kind of what you're getting on the back of, as it were. So
I think it's just about awareness. So we've gone past. Let's go back to talking about Ian and Sarah. We've gone past the point potentially about trying to do something about COVID regulations, because that's a huge thing. Going to get lost in translation, and there's so much going on. Very difficult to make any kind of change. I mean, Ian's interested in making a small change to something that's a big problem. So it may well something that he might look to in the UK. But something that we're potentially looking out here in Dubai is about women's mental health, maybe doing a fun run or something like that for Sarah. Just creating a certain amount of awareness, one, for women to be aware of how they're feeling themselves. Women are generally better at talking about their feelings than men anyway, but what I noticed from Sarah is there was limits to how far she would go with some of her friends, because she was still quite proud of who she was and who she was.
She was a professional, as you say. Like, she was a I don't know why, but in some way that I feel that's kind of different. If you're kind of, I don't know, in the creative, if your career is like a creative side of things, maybe that's when you can be more open and say, darling, I do therapy, that kind of thing. But she was a very corporate career business woman. And so, as you say, maybe that's where then perhaps the circle she was with was a bit like, okay, well, we don't all... And they're probably all seeing therapists and psychiatrists. But...
No, I mean, look, she had really great friends. I've got to know them, obviously. even better over the past month and a half.
I mean, I'm not slagging off her friends, obviously.
No,
I think that's important. I do think that's important to know. Because as we spoke about earlier, you know, I've got friends who have sadly taken their own lives, and you do, and you're like, what could I have done? What could I have done?
Yeah.
So carry on.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting that, but I didn't want also people, if anybody wishes to think that, but yeah, no, she did have really good friends, but at the same time, you know, there's certain limits, and I think, you know, she'd obviously reached her limit. So I think the awareness is two sides. One is for women to be aware of how they feel themselves, but the other is also for men, especially, you know, middle-aged men like me. I mean, I like to think I'm not quite middle-aged yet, but obviously I am, is because the reality is, you know, you can joke around about things that seem frivolous. It's a little bit like school bullying, like calling somebody a bucktooth or making fun of their haircut or whatever. Words hurt a lot more than any kind of physical damage. You know, most kids that are bullied would have much rather just been beaten up than had been taunted all of the time. So obviously, I'm not saying that women are being bullied. Of course, some women and men get bullied at older age, but to think about, have a bit more empathy and awareness about how a woman might feel about things that she's not happy. And I'm not just touching on things like whether they're single or whether they don't have children or how they look or what they're doing in their career or whatever it might be. But they do also go through those things, and men tend to throw those things off. The other one, of course, is the cosmetology side.
Okay.
You know, that's pretty big in Dubai, well around the world now. And you know, in Dubai, I think it grew earlier and much faster than, let's say, in the UK. And guys will look at it of like, why'd you do all of that? I mean, of course, some guys do it themselves. You know, doing the lips and the cheeks and things like that. And it's easy to say it doesn't look nice. And as a woman grows older, it doesn't look nice. But to say that, for a woman to hear that, who's spending obviously money trying to make herself look beautiful, obviously is going to hurt.
Was that Sarah? She had things done? Okay.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned it a couple of times, in so much that, had she spoken to you then about her looks and she wasn't happy with how she looked? And was that an actual look thing, or was it an age thing? She didn't want to grow older, or? Well,
I mean, I saw Sarah, last time I saw her was in November. I was with my daughter, so we were just playing games and talking about fun stuff. And I think that Sarah's illness kind of plummeted recently.
Okay.
I don't think it's something that's like a long-term thing.
Right.
So where I'm getting this is, as I mentioned, looking through her phone.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm not sure she'd necessarily share everything, but ultimately, you know, it was very clear that she was not happy with the way that she looked. She was not happy with the last visit that she went to the cosmetologist.
Okay.
And how she looked afterwards. I'm not saying that that's the reason.
No.
I'm just saying that it's a factor, and you have all of these build-ups, and women can then feel worthless, which is what Sarah felt. I'm not divorced. I'm not married. I wish I was still married to my ex-husband. I don't look good anymore. Nobody good is going to want to marry me anymore. I don't have children. I don't like my job. You know, she felt worthless, yet she's living in a very, she bought a very nice place in downtown, which had a perfect view of Burj Khalifa. She wasn't poor, she had a great job. But that sense of worthlessness is what men feel when men are looking to take their life. It's that fear of failure. But the failure from a man's part is different to a woman. I'm not going to speak about what women think, okay? I'm not, especially if I'm talking to
I was going to say, you're a brave man, Ewan.
I'm just talking about what I picked up from
of course,
that
yeah,
with
absolutely,
her.
yeah,
And
yeah,
creating
for sure.
that awareness, and that's how I felt one of the reasons for her. But I know also from relationships and women that I know, you know, over the last few years, also a lot of similar senses of things, and you know, insecurities, securities, etc. And for men, it's a failure of a different kind. You know, I've felt failure in my life, and that was, you know, really difficult to take as well. So, but different kinds of things.
It's interesting that you say that it all seemed to happen very quickly with Sarah, and as you say, I'm just trying to piece together, obviously, perhaps this last appointment with the surgeon or the clinic or whatever, and then obviously not being able to get home. Do you know when the decision was made that she wasn't going to fly home, that she...
Yeah, it was around the 22nd, was like, okay.
Yeah, because that was the time where here and then back in the UK there was the other lockdown, wasn't there? And people, even so here, were then cancelling their trips or even trying to get back early because they'd already flown to the UK, get back early. And then of course with her mum's health, so everything just went very downhill very quickly. And again, asking perhaps an obvious question, but even with her circle of friends that you know, there was nothing that spiked anybody's kind of, I hope Sarah's okay. That didn't, she seemed fine?
Yeah, no, nothing. So, you know, she'd messaged with friends, and I'm not going to say that she gave any indicator to any friends, because I don't want any of her friends to think that in somehow they should have picked up on things. And genuinely, there was nothing.
Yeah.
You know, there was one friend that she was quite close with, and he was in another country at the time, just a friend, and he was good, you know, he was supportive, you know, she was saying, she's not happy about this, fed up about this, but nothing like, you know what, I've had enough.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
reading through it, it was just Thursday morning, stopped. And she was at work on a Wednesday, yeah? And then on Wednesday, she said, Wednesday at about 4 o'clock in the morning, so Thursday morning, she messaged work to say, I haven't been able to sleep, I'm not going to come in today, I'm not feeling well. And the work were very supportive about it, and you know, she sent a message back saying, no problem, I hope you feel better soon, you know, take care. And then her phone basically went dead later on the Thursday morning.
And it's interesting that this is from my experience, as it were, and from any research I've done, is that she planned to do it, as you say, like when she said because she covered herself because she knew who would...
Planned like last second type of thing.
But that's what,
It was like, she wasn't in the headspace to be able to write a note, that's what I think.
Okay.
If she did take her life, which I'm fairly convinced that she did.
Can I ask why you, not why you would think otherwise, but what's the alternative to her have not taken her own life?
Yeah, I mean, don't necessarily want to speculate on that one, because I don't want to say things that is negative. But let's just say, for me, I'm 99.9% sure. You know, one of her friends was not so sure, and but you know, it's just, for me, I guess one of the main things is no note.
Fine. Okay.
You know, of course, her family deserved that, but what I've understood from Vivian Albertin, who's the guy who organised the cremation and funeral service for us. I'm trying to remember the name of his company now. He did a fantastic job. They organised everything from A to Z. A lot of empathy there. There's about 5 suicides a year that he handles here in Dubai. Yeah, and of course he's not the only agency that organises funerals and cremations. Yeah. And he said most of the time people don't leave notes. Yeah.
Really?
So this is a surprising thing. I don't know, and I need to research into it more. How often are letters left and notes written?
I guess it's because you just think of what you see on TV and movies, and for some reason.
Yeah, it's like, you're sitting there and you're writing a letter. I mean, I just can't imagine how difficult it would be to write a letter saying sorry to people you know love you. You're not in the right headspace. You're just not going to feel that you can do anything justice about this situation. So it's just, okay, well, let's just do this.
Yeah.
You know, had enough.
And at what point, when you're writing that letter, do you think, well, hang on, if I'm writing this to the people that care about me, maybe they care about me enough that I don't need to do this, almost. So maybe then that's another reason.
Yeah.
Again, I'm purely speculating.
Yeah, you know, me too. But I think, as I mentioned, I'm 99.9% convinced. Let's just say 100% convinced, because I don't want to create any.
No, for sure. But you're also allowed elements of doubt in your mind.
That she just felt that she'd had enough. She didn't want to cry for help. She didn't want to people to feel sorry for her. She didn't want people to judge her or feel that she's being dramatic or something like that, which again is something that women get accused of as well, being I get accused of being dramatic sometimes myself, but you know, women get it more again.
No, but you're right, we do. And if we show a little bit of like a raised voice or some anger, it's that we're a bitch. Or you know, or if we question, we were talking about dating and stuff earlier, or if we question something on a date, that you're a mentalist or you're a psycho, and these words affect you. I mean, you know, gaslit is the one that's out at the moment, isn't it? That's about
gaslighting.
Being gaslit all the time.
Yeah,
it's a new word. But no, sorry, carry
on. So I don't think that she was in the right headspace to be able to write a note. But back to your point, is that she was at that last moment, I mean, thinking about who was going to find her and how she was going to look. So she didn't want that person who was a cleaner who had been working with her for 6 years, was very close, only worked for Sarah, was under Sarah's sponsorship.
Oh, okay.
Didn't work for other people or another agency or anything like that, but she lived in another place.
But they become a family member, don't they?
Became very close. And so she didn't want her to see the light. So it's that last bit of thinking from that perspective.
And can you talk us through then, going back to more the logistics of it now? So Sarah's cleaner walked in, obviously had a key, came in and found her. Is she okay? You know, she must be in a terrible state as well. And then what were the next steps? What happened?
Yeah, no, it was obviously very traumatic for her cleaner, and I'm just pissed off with myself because I've forgotten her name, but I'm terrible with remembering names. Marietta. So Marietta found Sarah, and so she then called the police. She called one of Sarah's closest friends, who came straight away. The police cordoned off the area, the apartment, didn't let anybody in or out. They made sure that they were able to do a proper investigation. There's CCTVs in the corridor. You know, I could tell afterwards that they, you know, checked for fingerprinting, all of this kind of stuff. And then about, you know, within a couple of hours, Sarah's body was taken away. And then the investigation was completed within, I would say, about a week.
Okay.
We got the forensic report and the toxicology report. So here, of course, you always need to get the Arabic and the English. I would always recommend to go for an agency that specializes in these things. I ended up going to the police station myself the next day to see if I could help in any way with anything moving forward, because I wanted everything to try and be done before her father came out, so he would have to face as little as possible.
Because he'd already said that to you, hadn't he, as well? I want this to be a business transaction.
Yeah. So all of that was done really pretty efficiently. There wasn't necessarily a final police report. It was just a forensic report and toxicology report. And then it was just a case of organising the body being moved or a service here in Dubai.
Okay.
So Sarah's father chose for a cremation to happen here in Dubai.
Can I ask why? Instead of repatriating?
Well, on one side, he was concerned that it could take a long time, considering the circumstances, for her body to be repatriated to the UK, which he didn't like the idea of. It also very complicated, a lot of paperwork. And on the other front, I think he preferred a cremation in all cases. So the cremation happened here. It was a really nice service. I was telling you about it before. You know, you go out, head towards Jebel Ali. There's this little, what looks like a hut in the distance, but once you're inside, it was beautiful. You know,
Really?
there's like 40, 50 rose-wing parakeets just flying around in the trees. You know, there's no net or anything. So you've got that nice sound. You've got the birds flying. You've got the coffin and the body right there behind the celebrant, Kerry, and then doors close, and then within 48 hours you'll get the box with the ashes, and so all of that was straightforward.
Yeah.
We had to do you can't do the what's the word? The identification until the day of the cremation. So you can only do the cremation, you can only do the identification when the body's to be released from the morgue. Yeah?
Okay.
Now I don't know if that's the case just because of the circumstances, but I'm pretty sure it's the same. If you want to take the body from the morgue, then you need to identify and take the body. You can't just go and then be like, okay, and then come back. It's got to happen at the same time. So by the time Ian and I went to the identification of Sarah, it was, you know, a week and a half afterwards. You know, Kerry and Vivian had already explained to me that, look, the identification is not something that is, or you'll be taken into a room. It's not like what happens on TV. They'll open it, would you like a few moments to yourself, and then they'll leave, and then you can have a few words. No, it's business-like. You get there, you're waiting to be called into a room, they open the doors, the body is already on a stretcher ready to be taken into the ambulance. The ambulance is literally outside the door, you're in a waiting area, and there's the room. You see the temperature gauges changing, because obviously the bodies are kept in atmosphere controlled, I think that's the right word, and temperature controlled rooms. So you'll see it going, and that can be a little bit traumatic in itself, because you know, okay, the body's being taken out now, because you see the temperature drop all of a sudden, then it comes back up and then it drops again. So I was really struggling for what to say to Ian at that time to try and, you know, so we ended up just talking general small talk,
Yeah.
windows. Anyway, then they open the door, go in, identify the body. They were nice enough, you could see in their faces that they didn't mean any disrespect. They know it's a very difficult time. But within about 5 seconds, it's like, okay, this is Sarah Comedy? Yes, okay, thank you. And then zip back up, and then in the ambulance. So for anybody who's unfortunately this in the future, then that's, I think, something important to be aware of.
But is that the same as in the UK? And I've watched, it sounds ridiculous, I've watched a lot of crime dramas and on TV, and I guess maybe, obviously I've had a lot of deaths in my life, but I've never actually been there. But in my mind, it's they need to be identified so that they can do all the paperwork, and then that's when you then start booking everything in, and then obviously. So I thought that was quite immediate, but clearly not.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've never been through the process myself.
Yeah.
I don't know how the whole identification, I guess, is different. Like when my dad died, you know, he had a road sign going through his head, so it wasn't really an
Oh my God.
identification kind
You
of
can't
situation.
hang on, Ewan. That is not fair. You cannot just drop in something like that.
Yeah.
Because that. Right. Well, okay. We'll talk about your dad in a moment.
Yeah, the process is not. I wasn't involved in any kind of identification process, but pretty obvious, like in the same car with the other family members,
Right.
identification.
Yeah.
So I think it's, I don't want to say horses for courses, but you know what I mean. It just depends on circumstances.
Maybe, yeah, true,
how
true.
obvious
And if
it
there's going
is.
to be a criminal investigation or something like that.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Here in the UAE, of course. I mean, I'm only saying that because I've been here like 21 years. I've lost touch of how things are in the UK. But everybody's photo is their identification, fingerprints, etc. So they can identify a body easily.
Right.
They don't need somebody to identify the body anymore.
They'll probably ask you to have your Emirates ID handy
So,
all
so
the time.
the identification, by the way, just to clarify, it's not for the sake of the police or anybody like that. It's just for the sake of, are you taking the right body?
Yeah, that's, because otherwise you'd be, in effect, cremating the wrong person.
Yeah, don't want to do that.
And the reason why I ask about the weird timing is because, yes, I understand that, of course, this body you were going to be identifying, I don't mean to speak ill of her like that, but it's like, because it was found in Sarah's house, etc., etc. So, of course, circumstantial means it's going to be Sarah. But in my mind, the first thing I thought of when you said that was, well, what if you turn up and they go, well, that's not her.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't know why my brain went.
Well, I mean, at the same time, I guess, again, everything is here, fingerprinting, even iris scanning, pictures. Let's not forget Marietta was there.
Of course, yeah.
Like, this is Madame Sarah, So, I guess in that circumstance, it was very clear and obvious.
How is Ian now, Sarah's dad? He flew back to the UK.
Yeah, so he flew back to the UK about 2 weeks ago. He was here in total close to 2 weeks, I think. He obviously had to quarantine when he went back to the UK. He still has another adopted daughter, I should just say, and granddaughter. So he had to stay in a hotel for 14 days before he could see them. And of course, he's got the wills and the service to organise for his wife. And out here, I mean, of course it's a challenge, and it has to be organised out here as well with Sarah's matters as well. Anyway, he is doing okay. I don't speak to him every day. We message almost every day.
Are you close as uncle and nephew?
No, I mean, but in my family, it's just one of those things. I mean, even when I was younger, like after my parents got divorced, I would get a letter from my dad, like maybe once every, I don't know, I don't even remember getting that many letters from him. We would speak on the phone maybe once every 3 months or something, because he lived in another country.
Right.
So in our family, we tend to just talk when we see each other.
Yeah. Okay.
Like,
fine.
Okay, I'll see you when I see you. Old-fashioned kind of way. So yeah, actually the first time that I properly met him was at my dad's funeral.
Really?
Yeah, because it's like big family on that side. So yeah, but then we've got close enough over the years since I was in Dubai and Sarah was in Dubai, and when he would come out, he had a ridiculous appetite. I mean, the guy could eat like 4 plates of food. It was ridiculous. He's not even a big guy. He's like this skinny old guy, and he's got like hollow legs. He can just put the food away. It's just, honestly, it's crazy. I don't know how he doesn't get like...
Sounds like my absolute hero. Absolute hero. But so again, moving away from Sarah then slightly, just very quickly onto Ian. So he's gone back, obviously because of COVID and things in the UK as well. Did he miss his wife's funeral? Because he was quarantining? Yeah. Was he allowed to go to it?
Yeah, he put it on hold until he could come back.
Okay.
And anyways, it turns out it's not easy to book appointments. There's a backlog because, of course, there's you can't have as many going on at the same time. You've got the social distancing, so it seems to be a bit of a backlog. So it kind of worked out fine anyway.
Right,
There's nothing quick that can happen. So yeah, the service has happened now.
Okay.
He was there.
Yeah.
And so now I haven't spoken to him about where he is at the grieving stage. It just feels like a kind of awkward one, especially because he's not here with me. If he was here with me, I'd talk to him, but over the phone and messaging, it doesn't feel appropriate. He's got two brothers, one that lives close to him, so he can talk with him.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you check in with anybody else around him to ask after him?
Yeah, my aunties, my dad's sisters.
Yeah.
We message very infrequently, but at the moment we're checking in on each other. So they were glad that I was out here to be able to help Ian, and I was also glad because sometimes he was just, you could tell he just was not able to function. And of course, who would? Even if you're a fit, healthy young person in your 30s or whatever, how can you really handle that situation? So yeah, it was just good that there was people out here to be able to help him.
And back home as well, by the sounds of it, that are still nearby. Because as we touched on before we started recording, is that when does it hit you? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's quick, and sometimes it isn't. And the whole grieving process, as it were.
Yeah, in his case, kind of delaying the grieving process. Who knows whether that's the right thing or not? But he kind of had no choice.
Yeah. No one knows. No one knows. Thank you for talking about Sarah. I know it can't have been easy. I haven't even asked you how you are in your grieving process of Sarah. I bet that's been tough yourself, because whilst you're not close, she's still family and a friend. How have you dealt with it?
Yeah, no, I've been okay with it. Sounds like an odd statement to make, but I can reach acceptance quite quickly about things, and the only times that I got emotional about it really was thinking about Ian. Of course I care about Sarah, and of course I'm very sad about it, and of course there's a certain element of, could I have done something that, should I have checked in on him more? But of course, nobody has the hindsight. So I don't have any feelings of guilt. I don't feel, I wasn't aware. So I more think about her father and how it would feel to be in that situation where your daughter or your son decides to take their own life. It's just so difficult.
As a father yourself.
Yeah, to be able to take. So I was just focused on him, and that was fine for me.
Yeah, that's probably the way you've processed it as well. Do you think it will, I want to use a better expression than come back to bite you on the arse, but that's what I'm going to go with. Do you think that, obviously you've suffered a lot of grief, and we're actually going to touch on that, but do you think that it will come back, that perhaps you needed to look after yourself as opposed to just look after Ian, or?
No. I think I'm okay with that. Like I said, I've changed over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of being more aware about how I feel, whether I want to talk about things. I have 2 very close friends here in Dubai, and I can talk with them about anything if I ever want to, especially Marianne. It's good to have that kind of support. When it comes to friends, it's about quality over quantity, right? It should be.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing. Sometimes people get caught up into wanting to have too many friends, and just stay focused, because then you've got people who really care and have the time to listen to you. So no, I'm fine about those things. And
did it take you? You've mentioned sort of 5 or 6 years ago. Was there a catalyst for that? What happened 5 or 6 years ago that you then kind of changed your mindset?
yes, so I had my own company.
Okay.
I came out. I'll give a very short summary.
You can be as long or short as you
like. Just to give a bit of a backstory.
Okay.
So I was working in London. I was doing very well there. Then decided, you know what, everybody in here would stab me in the back for the sake of a deal, even though I was the top bidder at the time.
Okay.
I was just an angry young man because I was still getting over my father's death. So then thought, okay, Dubai, because I'd grown up abroad before anyway.
Not South Africa.
Not South Africa.
Right.
Never been actually at that point. And so I came out to Dubai with a confidence, but obviously I would not like to think an arrogant confidence, but it was I had total self-belief in myself and my abilities and what I was going to achieve. And even I would, tell my mum, this is where I'm going to be in a few years. And I didn't have any semblance of doubt. And I came out into Dubai in 2001, which was a very different place back then. Met my ex-wife in 2002, and she was also a great part to that whole confidence boosting piece. We made a great partnership. And so then everything going great. Then I set up my own company very irresponsibly without really thinking about it. Because again, I wasn't afraid, so it was all with my own capital. I'd already set up 2 companies before, partly equity from my side and then equity from main equity from the partners with KPMG, and also before that with a company called ITP, probably ITP Media.
Yeah.
So created equity partnerships before, but then I set up a company with 100% my own capital, which wasn't the smartest thing, but 2 kids, schools, Dubai's expensive. Everything, lifestyle, etc. But anyway, everything was going fine. So then wasn't happy in my marriage. There was no reason for it. There was no infidelity on either side. There was no, major abuse. It just wasn't quite the same. So then we went through a divorce, which was very difficult for me as well. People say, oh, well, just because, it's not. But when you love somebody, and you know that you're about to break their heart, it's heartbreaking for you as well. So I was going through that for a full year, as well as trying to make sure that she was okay, that she didn't feel any fear, because she didn't work through her own choice through the whole of our marriage. So I made sure that she didn't need to worry about things or anything like that.
And you already had the kids at this stage?
Yeah. Kids were 11 and 7 at the time, and wanted to make sure that things were okay for the kids, because if we're fighting and bickering, then the kids aren't going to be happy. So then the problem was I tried to go too big with my own company at the same time, but I put a lot of eggs into 2 big baskets in Saudi.
Okay.
One of them lost their government funding because of the king dying, and the other lost the funding because they just decided to screw me over.
Okay.
Because they're bastards.
Okay.
So I literally went from it was a Sunday morning. I was in Saudi, and I realized that I wasn't going to be getting the money from one of the accounts which I was waiting on, and it was like suddenly hit me. Shit, I'm screwed. What the hell am I going to do here? I want to pay everybody out, which I did, who worked in the company. I'm about to take my son to his first World Finals go-karting championship in Paris. I can't even afford to take him now. How the hell am I going to do it? I'm literally out of money. Anyway, within the coming few days, I managed to get one client to put 80 grand in my account, and managed to take my son to the World Finals, which is great, thanks God for that. And I didn't tell my son at the time, look, I'm screwed, but I told him later. So there was a moment when my son looked at me, which was a few months after that, and I could just see like, oh, you're not making, you can't afford that. And it was just, it was crushing, because you feel like a bit of a failure.
Okay. Yeah.
So that in itself was like a learning experience of like, okay, how to handle that myself. And I had to handle it on my own, because through my own stupidness, I'd already broken up with my ex-wife, who could have made me feel good about the whole thing. Didn't want to speak to her about it because, of course, time has passed. Didn't really have anybody else to talk to at the time either, because I was just focused in on my work. So I didn't really have any real close friends at that time.
Okay.
And so then my mental health was affected. It affected my physical health. And then there was this one day I was walking, step forward a few months later, one of my clients hired me.
Okay.
So I still work for them now.
So both the businesses failed. So your businesses.
Yeah, it went kaput. Didn't have anything. I had no choice but to basically close the company down. I was totally out.
Divorce was settled, so there was payouts there, and
yeah. I mean, I made a divorce agreement that, of course, my ex-wife, well, not of course, but that I knew that she would be happy with, and she wouldn't have any concerns about the future. But it wasn't very good for me, especially after I went bankrupt, and of course I still hold by it. But regardless. So then, a few months later, I was walking back, and that was like the first time that I really kind of cried with that sense of failure. Really hit hard and bad, and like I said, it affected my physical health to the point where sometimes I would stand up and just be dizzy, like from pains in my back. And I think getting that out was good. That's actually something that happened not long after my father died, when I eventually stopped being a bit of a dick. Am I allowed to say that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was interesting, because the reason why I smiled is because I could see you searching for how you were going to describe yourself. Yeah. And by the sounds of it, you've recognised that.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
No, I definitely recognised that back then. So that was good, and that's why I started to feel, okay, I don't have anybody to talk to here. I don't want to talk to my mum, because I don't want her to get worried. So then I started to feel, okay, talking is actually something that's important. It does actually make you feel better to get things off your chest. So, yeah, it just changed my view on everything. But I guess in answer to your question, because in that short period of time from going bankrupt to accepting that I'm going to have to completely rethink everything about the future, feeling that sense of failure had such a knock-on effect to my confidence. I'm still confident about my abilities and moving forwards and things like that, but it's different to before. So I'm still planning to set up my own company again in the future.
Still haven't been burnt then, you?
Yeah, but I'm not stupidly ambitious to how I was before by thinking it's gonna happen.
Yeah, you can't just stop at every failure, as it were.
So me and my daughter were gonna set up a cake shop. So
yes,
be back in a few years to advertise that. Hopefully.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Why a cake shop? Are you a baker, or is it just your daughter?
Well, yeah, I mean, I bake the cakes and then she decorates them. So she loves to decorate cakes. She's really good at it as well. She just has a great touch. She gets that from her mum. And and then she came up with this idea that she's going to make these cupcakes and then go and sell it in the park.
Yeah.
So that she makes some money.
Yeah.
Great.
Entrepreneurial spirit. How old is she? 11?
She's now just turned 12.
Okay.
But she was like 10 when she started doing that.
Okay.
So I tried to explain to her about profit. I said, okay, so I've spent 40 dirhams on the ingredients. You've just made 110. So then that means that you've made 70 dirhams profit if you give me the 40 dirhams back. She's like, give you it back? But so she didn't quite get that part.
Okay,
but,
that's fine. Baby steps. Okay,
yeah.
So you're going to set up business with your daughter, which is brill. Do we have a name for the company?
Doodles.
Doodles. Doodles cupcakes, doodles cakes, or just.
Probably just doodles. We'll see how we go with that, because I call her Noodle.
Oh.
And then sometimes Noodle, Doodle, Woodle, whatever, you know.
But obviously, being in the UAE, it's going to be Doodles, FZ, LLC,
exactly.
some free zone or whatever.
Exactly.
So, I wanted to ask, hang on, you said about...
You started thinking about cupcakes.
No, yeah, I know. And it's coming up to lunchtime. I always end up talking about food. I don't know why I record these podcasts in the morning. I haven't eaten yet, and then I just lose all concentration. I don't, I promise. Was there a time when you went through this tough time? So when you said about when you physically broke down in tears on this walk, was there a time... Sorry, let me reword this. When you said that you were on this walk and you physically broke down in tears, at that point, did you think, I need to seek professional help, or was it just simply, I just need to talk to someone?
Yeah, no, good question. I don't think it wasn't about that I need to seek help or anything. It was just, I think, having that cry, breakdown, whatever you want to call it, on that, you know, quiet, dark street on the way back. It's good that it was dark.
Why do you say that?
Well, because, you know, it looks a bit weird walking down the road and you see a guy who's just like bawling his eyes out, you know.
Just asking, yeah.
And so having that was therapy in itself for me, because it made me feel better to kind of get it out, because I'd been holding it in, and then it was like, okay, fine, I f***ed up. You know, I've made some really bad choices here, and now I've really got to rethink things. And then things started to get better from there. And I think when you've got good mental health, which thankfully I do have, you can hit the reset button and get things back on track once you've got to the point of really accepting things. The moment that you're trying to, the period that you're trying not to accept something, whether it's somebody's death or where you are in your period of life or whatever, that's when there can be your mental health could deteriorate. Yeah, so you've got to accept things and move forwards. So that's what happened. I mean, there are things in the past that I used to think that I regretted, but actually, if they hadn't have happened, then I wouldn't be where I am now. I'm happy where I am at the moment, especially because Oliver and Karen are like in really good places, both of them.
They're your kids.
Yeah, sorry. And obviously there's always things that you'd like to have in your life, but you know, I'm happy with who I am as a person, and I'm happy enough with where I am in life. Sure, life can be a bit tricky sometimes, but you know, just be thankful for what you've got. I mean, me and you, we're sitting on a nice sofa in a nice country, everything's okay. We might have some stresses on our life.
For sure.
But things could be a hell of a lot worse.
For sure.
A hell of a lot worse.
You say that, but again, it's one of those things where, you know, you are allowed to have your own stresses. And of course, we, as you say, we are here with now sort of not a lot of financial worries, for example, and we're healthy and we're happy and we live in this house and what have you, but it doesn't mean that we aren't allowed to
be disappointed about certain things.
Yeah, and have our own stresses and worries. And of course, that's not that the halloumi was out of stock in the supermarket this afternoon. I mean, that's, you know, the hashtag first world problems kind of thing. But I've touched on it many times before with the grief or trauma that I've suffered, is that people then sometimes feel that they can't say to me, oh, you know, they had a shit day at work. Well, of course they can. You know, everyone's allowed to have those things. Yeah,
I mean, look, it's very easy to turn around to somebody and say, come on, look at everything that you've got going in your life, you should be happy. I mean, you know, obviously Sarah's a classic case of that. Very difficult for people to take that on board, but if you're not feeling good in yourself or about yourself, the last thing you want, not necessarily the last thing, but one of the things that you really don't want to hear is somebody saying, yeah, but look how good your life is, everything is fine. You just want somebody to listen to what you've got to say. Get it off your chest. And that's something that's also something I would be interested in making some awareness about, but it's maybe a touchy subject, especially in the UAE, is about the quality of psychologists and psychiatrists here in the UAE.
Okay.
I don't think that the psychologists, from the limited experience that I have with people that I know close to me who've been, I don't think that they're the quality that they are. They're all too quick to give judgments and advice on what is and isn't factors in what's causing the upset.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not necessarily recognizing that that actually could be driving the person to feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
When actually a psychologist's role, in my opinion, is there to help that person guide the conversation to get things out.
Mm-hmm.
There was somebody that I know who was close to me, so she went to see a psychologist. The very first session, the psychologist turned around to her and said, "Your housemate is the source of your," I wasn't the housemate, is the source of your, is toxic. Using that kind of language. So here's somebody who's coming, who's very upset about the things that, things in her life, and coming to you as a doctor, and then you're sending them away to their home, making them feel that the person they're living with is not good for them.
Mm.
Well, you can't just kick that person out the same day, whatever.
Mm.
Plus, how can that person know all of the details? Because invariably, a lot of people, men or women, obviously, I'm not being gender focused on this one, will invariably, especially with a first-time psychologist, give their side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not just two sides of the story. Sometimes there's 4 or 5 versions, and the way things happen. So I think that needs to be looked at. Another friend of mine, she's getting involved with an app that is related to linking psychologists. So it's online counsellors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've used one of those before.
Yeah, and so there's ideas that can be created about how to expand that to make sure there's a psychologist who really fits with your comfort level, maybe cultural, maybe gender, what's your preferences, age preferences, whatever it might be. The right person, they could be anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that is great for people to have. They also feel more comfortable about that, rather than sitting with somebody.
Yeah, and that's why, and actually I use that, and it's an app called BetterHelp. Not sponsored, would love to be. Although I'm very happy at the moment that I don't need to use it. But
Right.
so you literally, yes, you write down what you would, why you seeking help initially, and mine was through some trauma that I'd just suffered, and I was actually partnered with a counsellor, and literally we just didn't gel straight away, not for any reason, but and so then you can just say, and then I was repartnered, it was like swipe left. It was this Tinder for counsellors, and I was partnered up with a different counsellor, and she was fantastic. Now my only worry about that is that's because I had a grief counsellor from when my parents died, a real life physical grief counsellor of whom I'd met in Dubai, and subsequently, I said joke about this before, after 5 sessions with her and her living here for 15 years, she moved home to the UK, so I don't know quite how to take that, but that's fine. But now we have Zoom sessions. So I knew what it should feel like. Does that make sense? To speak to a counsellor or a therapist?
Sure.
It would worry me for kind of first-time therapy seekers, that they would either think that the first experience was a bad experience and that that's it for therapy, and then not try it again. Do you know what I mean? My brother touched on this in episode 2 actually. So it would worry me that they wouldn't they would just think, no, I'm not going to do it again if they didn't help me the first time. But that's a roundabout circle way of me agreeing with you that the app is really good.
Yeah.
And it's also good, slightly taking over your conversation, apologies. It's my podcast. I can do what I want. No, is that sometimes sometimes whatever it was I was speaking to these people, this counsellor on the app, on BetterHelp app, was that they're based in America. So sometimes time different wise, I would have like a real sense of, I'd be quite low. And so you can message or email, but I would kind of direct message her. But then by the time she woke up, and it wasn't as if she wasn't there for me, but I actually felt a lot better. But then she was still able to come back to me and ask me questions of, why I felt like that and do I feel better now thinking about it. But it was so nice. Sometimes you'll write an email, you'll reply to your boss or some client and who's being a complete prat, and you write it in this real sense of anger, and then you just delete. But it's quite cathartic to write it. So that's another reason. I'm a huge advocate of these online counselling apps.
And your point also being matched up with somebody who fits you best. So sometimes when you go physically, it can feel like, as you said, maybe somebody decides, didn't really feel comfortable, I'm not going to bother trying that anymore. I think things being online now, obviously, especially if we're talking about quarantines and isolations, it's the perfect timing for those kinds of things as well, and for anything to be online. But get the matching right. Make sure that you're also certified, so for these app companies that are creating that link, so that people can feel easy to reach out and have that discussion, and whether it's a 15-minute sessions, 30-minute sessions, what's the focal point, advise them correctly on the background. And here in Dubai you've got a lot of mixtures of challenges that people go through, and so nobody wants to be judged, so I think that in itself is a great thing. I think it's also something that will fly. People are going to get more and more connected with online counsellors.
Well, I know when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you have, and I think it was you or Ian, Sarah's dad, have quite strong opinions with regards to medication as well for mental health, mental illness.
Yeah.
Touch on that for me.
Yeah, I mean, Ian knows about this much better than me, but it's making sure that there's the right awareness being given about medications that are like SSRI type medications that are real downers, because what you don't realize is that some of them will hit you after 3 or 4 weeks, or the effect will slowly start to come into your system, so you'll feel it over a certain period of time, and if you stop in the 3 or 4 weeks, then it's much more damaging. And what are the potential side effects, how you might feel. So when it starts to kick in 3 or 4 weeks, actually you might start to feel initially more depressed, more because your body is telling you, okay, you're trying to fight the how you're feeling. That's what we're planning to do. We wanted to do a brainstorming session a couple of weeks ago. We're planning to do one when Ian eventually comes out. You're invited, of course.
Thank you.
It'd be lovely if you wanted to come.
Yeah, be honest.
Just brainstorm different ideas.
Just to raise awareness.
Yeah, just to raise awareness, whether it's about women's mental health, whether it's about medication in itself, or whether we go for something bigger like quarantine, isolation, COVID, which not in the UAE anyway, at least.
Yeah, and it's such a buzzword, isn't it? Awareness, mental health awareness, and these corporate companies. There's a brilliant meme that is going around about corporate mental health awareness, and one of the characters says, can we recommend a mental health day a month, and perhaps less work and employ more people and that kind of thing. And then the boss has said, no, we'll give you free yoga once a month. And it's like they do these things to try and think that they're doing it. And I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but my one of my previous roles was for a company here in PR and events, which is a very high pressured, very stressful job, obviously, looking after clients all the time. My role within the company, my title was culture manager. So I was one of only 2 culture managers globally. And my one of the lines in my job description, legitimate in my job description, was to promote internal happiness. Now that's not me walking around dressed as a clown, smell my flower and like performing tricks. It was genuinely to make sure that people were okay, that they knew they could come and talk to me, whether that was just, I ended up almost becoming like this maybe sounds a bit, I've never actually kind of vocalized this, but almost like an internal shrink, if you like, because people would just send me a message or just walk past me and go, just come to the kettle with me, or just pop into the canteen, and they'll talk to me about a client they've just got off the phone with who's spoken to them like absolute crap, because that's, as you know, how it works. It could be, boyfriend, girlfriend trouble or parents trouble, and people would end up just chatting to me.
And did you feel, like at the time, you probably were happy to be somebody who could help them feel better, but did you feel at any point, like after a while, like, okay, it's also affecting your own moods, hearing negative stories or concerns, or you were just always able to stay positive?
Yeah, no, I love this. The tables have been turned. No, I'm the same as you in so much that I do believe I've got very strong mental health. This was actually after both of my parents had died. I actually joined this company, and I'll mention their name. I speak about them a lot, Darbo & Co. They were very, very open about wanting to make sure that their staff were okay, because it was a really stressful job. Yeah, I joined them actually shortly after I came back from the UK after my dad died. So I'd been through a lot of shit as well, but it wasn't as if sometimes I'd hear people, like we touched on earlier, it's like, oh God, I get it. So your girlfriend dumped you, like who cared? Are your parents dead? No.
Yeah.
It was nothing like that at all, because it was important to these people. And I guess maybe like ultimately as well, say you were this employee, my colleague, I wanted you to be okay because you were doing a job and we needed you to make the company money and do a good job. So I don't know, it's a really weird one. Don't ask me questions on my podcast that I'm not in a position to answer all of a sudden. It really threw me. Well, but I enjoyed it. I did like it, and I think again not blowing my own trumpet was then again how I mentioned about this podcast with Richard Overy, who came on last week. Was he was so surprised at how open people are when they talk, and I have been as well, but I think it's because because I'm so open and relaxed. I think it just lets everyone else be so open and relaxed, and you seem to have the very same relaxed attitude, whereby I was nervous about doing this podcast with you because not only is it the first suicide that we've spoken about, but the fact that it's so new and so raw that I actually said to my friend, I was like, I don't really know how to do this. I don't know how to ask you questions, but I haven't hesitated about asking you any questions. And so I think that that's credit to you all.
I mean, if Sarah was my daughter, I know that I wouldn't be able to, I would struggle to talk to anybody.
Of course.
So, it is easy. Look, I think talking about things, when somebody's really been through grief, which of course most people have,
but sometimes they don't even know.
Maybe sometimes they don't even know.
Do you know what I mean? They think grief is death, but
But I think, as we were talking about before, I think once you accept whatever it is that's creating a lot of unhappiness for you, and can move forwards, then that's a good thing. Like you mentioned about your podcast was initially going to be the Dead Parents Society.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool. You're sad about your mum and dad dying. Yeah. Of course you are.
Terrible.
But at the same time, it's not. You just have to be sad about it all the time. You can inject some positive humor into it because they don't want you to just be sad all the time. They want you to have fun, but as long as you're also not masking your own, emotions.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and again, it was something that we spoke about on the phone before we met, was that I think maybe something that I've learnt over the years as to how I've dealt with my mum and dad's deaths is that the reason why I've always been so comfortable and open about it is to let other people know, because I want people to ask me about my mum and dad. I will talk to anyone that will listen about my mum and dad because they were incredible people. Ewan, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's lovely to speak to you and see you, and hopefully it's been interesting.
It has. It's been really interesting. But I'm grateful to you for talking about Sarah so early and for the awareness that you want to raise, but also talking about your own kind of personal journey as well, sort of outside of that and what you've been through. And can I just please say that I'm very excited about Doodles, and I would like some cupcakes, please.
Definitely. In fact, my daughter will come and drop some off for you soon.
Yes. Okay. What can I request? Carrot cake. Carrot cake.
She does make very good. Actually, she has to make that. I'm not very good at carrot cake, so she'll make it and decorate it just for you.
Yes. Okay. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.